We've all had a crush on someone, but when asked to describe this person, what do we say? Well, we like that they're attractive or funny or considerate, but this isn't obviously the full picture of this person. We don't know their full complete history. We don't know the thoughts in their private mind. What we know of them is simply an image of what our mind considers them to be. We aren't so much falling for the objective person as we are for the mental image we have of them in our mind. Now, why limit this to just love though? A lot of our understanding of things in this world are not of the objective thing, but rather a mental representation of that thing. Are we just alone and isolated from the world, simply in our own head with our own subjective thoughts? The forgotten philosopher we're talking about today, Jose Ortega y Gasset, is going to offer us a way out of this lonely way of looking at being and instead push us to embrace living. Ortega was born in Madrid in 1883. I remember visiting Madrid 2 years ago and loving their public transportation system, personally. Now, as a kid, he wasn't playing Halo 3 like you and I did, no. He studied philology and Greek at a Jesuit school. After that, he went through the whole academia thing and got his doctorate in philosophy at the Central University of Madrid. Now, you'd think after working your ass off to get a degree, you'd at least take a break from being a student. But no. He went over to Germany next to study even more philosophy, specifically Neo-Kantianism. Then, in 1908, he came back to Spain and became a philosophy professor. But this workaholic did not stop there. On the side, he wrote essays for newspapers, including his most famous work, The Revolt of the Masses, and he was involved in Spanish Parliament. So things were going good for our boy. But then in 1936, the Spanish Civil War broke out, and he and his family fled to Argentina for safety. After things settled down, he returned, not being able to find the same success as before, because both sides of the conflict didn't really like him. The Republicans thought he was a coward for running away, and the Nationalists just considered him an intellectual enemy. Still, he did his best to still teach philosophy whenever and however he could, until ultimately passing away in 1955 in Madrid. So we have here a life filled with uncertainty and turmoil, from enjoying success to fleeing a war to trying to rekindle that lost success from earlier. Now, the work we're going to look at is not his most famous Revolt of the Masses, but rather a series of lectures compiled into a book entitled What is Philosophy? This book is not, as it sounds, an introduction to philosophy, but rather a culmination of different thoughts leading to a new way of looking at being and philosophy. Ortega takes a look at the current trends in philosophy and recognizes something he calls idealism. Idealism to Ortega is an emphasis on the mind as the totality of our being. I know that sounds weird and vague, but bear with me. In our intro, we talked about how we fully couldn't objectively understand the person we had a crush on. Instead, who we have a crush on is really just the idea of who that person is in our heads. Idealism applies this to everything in the world. You look at a chair, you're not objectively knowing the chair, but rather you're sensing the chair from a specific angle in a specific context, and it's all going through the biases in your mind. You're not interacting with the objective chair, the thing in itself, but rather your mental understanding of that chair. Now think about how lonely this all sounds, how you can't really interact with the objective outside world, but all you really have access to are your mental perceptions of these things. Now, let's go back to Descartes. Descartes' like, yeah, that's totally fine though, because cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. Even though I can doubt the external world, simply because I can think, I know I exist. So really, everything including our own being is situated within the mind. This is how Ortega describes the whole situation. For the moment, things are no more than contents of the conscious. It is not in Descartes, although it could and should be there, but it germinates in the books of Kant. Thanks to him, we take external reality and put it within the mind. Ortega is going to reject this view. He's going to ask, okay, if everything including our being depends and is situated on our mind, what if we took everything else away? What if we took away all objects and you just exist in a world with nothing, in some void? In fact, when I say you, don't think about your body anymore or even your material brain. All you have is mind, is thought. No objects, no time, no space, nothing. To Ortega, this ridiculously weird scenario is not being. To be and to think requires things to think about. It requires a world of things. Sure, philosophers have all these thought experiments about brains in jars just thinking with no sensations, but those are just abstract thought experiments. In actuality, in order to be and to think, you need a world to be in and think about. Now, Ortega does not throw out all of the idealist objections to us experiencing the objective world. He instead uses it to suggest a dependent relationship between us and the world. I am the the one who now sees it. It is what I now see. Without it, and other things like it, my seeing would not exist. That is to say, I would not exist. Without objects, there is no subjects. But likewise, with no subject, there are no objects. And that's how Ortega incorporates idealism into his philosophy, but also moves past it. Like walking up a set of stairs, he uses idealism to get to his destination, but also moves on. So we have this new way of looking at being. For Descartes, thinking was sufficient for being. If you think, then you are. Case closed. But for Ortega, to be you must be in a world, the world. For those in the know, this sounds a bit like Heidegger, and you'd be correct. Ortega himself recognizes that. This new way of looking at being gets us out of this lonely, isolated view of ourselves and throws us into a world to be in. I exist for the world, and the world exists for me. If there were no things to be seen, thought about, and imagined, I would not see, think, or imagine. That is to say, I would not exist. This leads into Ortega's emphasis on living, hence the title of this video. No, it wasn't a reference to the living philosophy, but he's cool, so subscribe to him as well. What I mean by calling Ortega the living philosopher is that he's emphasizing the importance of living as a need to be. I know that sounds kinda obvious, but it is a pretty radical departure in the context of the history of philosophy. The truth is that I exist with my world and in my world, and I consist in occupying myself with this my world, in seeing it, imagining it, thinking about it, loving it, hating it, being sad or being happy in it and through it, in moving about in it, in transforming it, and in suffering from it. To be honest, I understood this much easier and clearer with Ortega than with Heidegger, so if you're interested in ontology, I would personally suggest checking out Ortega first, but that's just me. So that's just a little taste of Ortega to get you into him. I suggest checking him out yourself, and I'd recommend the book What is Philosophy? However, if you are more politically inclined than my dumbass is, then why not go for his most famous work, Revolt of the Masses? In the comments, give me your thoughts on Ortega, but also give me your thoughts on the length of these Forgotten Philosopher videos. Should I go more in depth with the biography, the philosophy? Should I just decide based on what seems more interesting while I'm researching? Regardless, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell button to stay updated for when that next video drops. And with that, I wish you all a beautiful rest of your day.